think I'm ready. In this video, we are going to introduce the subject of industrial hygiene. This is the first video in the industrial hygiene class. Some of you have had other industrial hygiene classes in the past. Let me go ahead and mention this for those of you who may not know. At NSU, we have a two-class sequence for industrial hygiene. 3423, which is this class, covers pretty much the first part of the textbook that we're using. 4423 covers topics found in the second part of the textbook. 4423 is not more advanced, it's not more difficult than 3423. It's just the way the course numbers are sequenced, and this is the way we've sequenced this class. The problem is that we run into, though. Some students take 4423 before they take 3423. Ideally, everybody will take 3423 first and then follow up with 4423. Because we get out of sequence, I have to cover a lot of the same topics at the beginning of the semester. So if you had 4423 last spring, the first part of this class is going to look very familiar to you. I've got to do an introduction to industrial hygiene for both classes because they're taken out of sequence. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, if 3423 is your first class, you're perfect, you're in the right sequence. And when you take 4423, though, you'll probably see a lot of this introductory information again, which again is not necessarily bad. We learn through repetition. Hearing information one time probably isn't enough anyway, so it's not bad that you get multiple exposures to the content that we're going to be covering in this unit and also in the second unit. Maybe a little bit in the third unit even may overlap with what I've done in 4423. So go ahead and take a look at the outline for this unit. We're going to do some definitions, talks about types of hazards that are industrial hygiene types of hazards, examples of diseases and illnesses that kind of fall under the industrial hygiene umbrella. Routes of exposure will be discussed. Then we'll talk about information sources of information that can be very valuable to a safety manager when we are dealing with industrial hygiene types of workplace conditions. And we'll finish the unit by talking about the evaluation process. And I don't want to go into it too much right now, what I mean by evaluation process. When I get to that topic, I'll explain what we mean by the industrial hygiene evaluation process or the workplace evaluation process. Also, when we talk about that evaluation process, we will talk more about different sources of information. More information about information sources. Now, there will be 2 video lectures for this unit. The first video lecture, get my pen out here. The first video lecture will stop right here. The second video lecture will cover the last part of the unit. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I should mention that pretty much everything that we cover in Unit 1 in the video lectures goes along with or complements Chapter 1 of your textbook. And I do want to mention that textbook that we're using, that is like the Bible of industrial hygiene. It is highly regarded, very comprehensive. It's a great textbook. Now, if you go further in your study of industrial hygiene, you will have more specific textbooks that focus on different types of industrial hygiene subjects. But as far as a general overview of industrial hygiene, it doesn't get better than the textbook that we're using. Now, when I did the course introduction video, I described industrial hygiene in this way. In industrial hygiene, we focus on the work activities, the work environment, and conditions in the work environment that can result in a variety of diseases and/or physical disorders. And I gave you 3 examples here that fall under the industrial hygiene umbrella. Chemicals that can cause disease, noise in the workplace, work activities, work procedures that can result in musculoskeletal disorders. The ergonomic side of industrial hygiene. Oh, and ergonomics, in fact, is a good example of a subject that falls under the industrial hygiene heading, but it itself is a specialty area. Some of you might be taking ergonomics class right now with Dr. Rick. It's an excellent class. I love teaching that class myself. I'm kind of envious that I'm not getting to teach it again this semester, because it really is an important class for safety managers. But it falls under industrial hygiene. Again, that's how I've described industrial hygiene already in the course introduction video. Here is a more textbook definition of industrial hygiene, and pardon me for reading to you, but I am going to read this to you. It's the applied science focusing on the interaction between the worker and the work environment. So we have worker, work environment, with a focus on understanding and controlling harmful conditions in the work environment. And by harmful conditions, there's a lot of different directions you can go with that. And that's what we're doing in this class. We will expand on everything I've said so far. And when I'm done with this unit, we're going to continue expanding on the topics, the concepts that are introduced in this unit. This is just, we're just dipping our toe in the water of industrial hygiene with this unit. So this is not going to be the be-all, end-all, everything you need to know about industrial hygiene. Industrial hygiene involves anticipating, recognizing, evaluating, and controlling workplace conditions that may cause workers illness or chronic disease. Industrial hygienists use environmental monitoring and analytical methods to detect the extent of worker exposure and employ engineering, work practice controls, and other methods to control potential health hazards. I know there's a lot of jargon here, and there's a lot of technical sounding terminology being used. Environmental monitoring is an example of some maybe technical jargon. That just means that we're taking measurements in the workplace to see what workers are exposed to and how much of that stuff they're exposed to. Analytical methods, that might refer to different calculations that we might do, or different laboratory procedures that might be done. And speaking of laboratory procedures, when it comes to industrial hygiene work, there is a laboratory component to it. As a safety manager generalist, you probably will not be doing any kind of laboratory analysis. You will send your samples off to a laboratory that specializes in those methods, and they will do the analysis for you. But more on that as we move through the course. I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Industrial hygiene is an important component of a safety program, but industrial hygiene alone does not constitute a safety program. It's a component of a safety program that focuses on certain types of hazards in the workplace. A lot of the emphasis in industrial hygiene is on hazardous substances, more specifically chemicals in the workplace. And we're going to talk more about that as we move through this introductory units. Again, it is necessary for most companies to have an industrial hygiene component, an industrial hygiene program as part of their safety program, as part of their larger safety program. Now, some industries will have greater exposure to industrial hygiene types of hazards than other industries. If you end up working as a safety manager in a chemical manufacturing facility, well, there's going to be much more of what we would consider industrial hygiene in your job than, let's say you go to work for a poultry processing company. There's still going to be some industrial hygiene types of hazards. There's still going to be some chemicals. There's still going to be other types of exposures that fall under the industrial hygiene umbrella, but it might not be as significant as what you would see, say, in a chemical manufacturing facility, or in a manufacturing facility where a lot of chemicals are used. The paper industry, for example, paper manufacturing uses some pretty nasty chemicals, and the safety manager in that facility would probably would apply more industrial hygiene in their job than someone working, say, for a construction company or a poultry processing company. So it's different industries have different hazards. Some go along more with the content of this class, some not so much. Another thing I want to mention is the possibility that some of you may really like industrial hygiene and you want to study more industrial hygiene. You can graduate from our program, and if you have the right prerequisites, you can go to the University of Oklahoma and be admitted to their master's program in industrial hygiene. And let's take a quick look at that program. I want to show you the classes that you would be taking in that program. I don't want to spend a lot of time with it. But again, this is the Master of Science degree in Industrial Hygiene and Environmental Health Sciences. So, curriculum. Here are the classes that you would be taking in this program. I'm not going to read all of these to you. Principles of Environmental Health and Safety Management, Noise and Radiation Hazards. They have one class just on noise and radiation. What else they got here? Let's see. They have a class on ergonomics. Occupational and environmental toxicology. We're going to talk about toxicology in more detail in the second unit, but they have a whole class devoted to toxicology in the workplace. So it's a good program. I've heard nothing but great things about the program, and it is ABET accredited, which is a great thing for that program. I believe this program at OU and programs at OSU are the only ABET accredited programs in the state of Oklahoma. And when I say this industrial hygiene program is ABET accredited, at OSU it's the Fire Protection Management program that's ABET accredited. I don't think their general safety program is ABET accredited, and I could be wrong, and I apologize if I am. If you are interested in learning more about that, look into it on your own. But again, these are the classes that you would take if you were to go on and get a master's degree in industrial hygiene. But there's one thing I need to mention. I don't want to throw a wrench in everybody's plans to go on and get a master's degree in industrial hygiene, but it is a difficult program to get into, and there are a lot of science classes that you need to take as prerequisites. My pen's not working here. Let me see if I can highlight this with my mouse. 36 hours in basic sciences, mathematics, engineering, and technology. Now, some of the classes in our programs would count toward that, but the real sticking point for some of us might be the 12 hours in chemistry. At least 12 hours in chemistry. And we have to take organic chemistry. Have to have a course in biology or physiology or biochemistry. Also have to have a physics class. These are prerequisites to be admitted into the program. It's not impossible. You guys, if you're interested in industrial hygiene, you could maybe have to alter your plan of study a little bit, but you could take physics and you could take a little bit more chemistry and meet these prerequisites to get into the industrial hygiene program at the University of Oklahoma if you wanted to. Graduates of this program are going to be industrial hygiene specialists. They're going to be specialists that general safety managers might call if they have an industrial hygiene type of problem in their workplace. One of the things that we do as a generalist safety manager when it comes to industrial hygiene types of hazards, we don't always do it all ourselves. It's okay to call consultants in. I've done some of the industrial hygiene types of monitoring and work myself, but I've also called in consultants, industrial hygiene specialists, to help with different projects that I had going on in the workplace. And that's just common. That's common. You don't think that you graduate from our program and you're going to have to do all the industrial hygiene stuff yourself. If you have some air sampling that you need to do, it's okay to call a consultant. It's okay to outsource that. Of course, you'll be working with that consultant and you will have a role to play. But that consultant that does this every day may be the better person. That may be the better way of going for your company if you need to do air sampling or some other type of industrial hygiene type of analysis in your workplace. All right, well, let's go ahead and close this. If you have any questions about the OU program, you can, of course, always ask me, but I would encourage you to contact the program itself, the University of Oklahoma. And it's through the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, and it's in Oklahoma City instead of Norman. But again, there's more information out there if you would like to hear more about that program. These are the types of workplace conditions, and keep in mind we are at the very general overview level here. But these are the types of workplace conditions that fall under that industrial hygiene focus. Potentially harmful atmospheres, potentially harmful air, stuff in the air that could be harmful to workers. And again, it's not just workers either that we need to be considerate of or that we need to think about with our operations. If we are, let's say we're employed at a chemical manufacturing facility, certainly we need to do what is necessary to protect our workers, but there's also a liability in the larger community. If we have a chemical release, it could affect a neighborhood adjacent to the facility. There have been a number of instances in the last 2 or 3 decades where harmful gases, vapors, or whatever were released from a facility, and it affected people living in the area or working in the area at other factories. So as safety managers, as industrial hygienists, it's not always just our workers that we're concerned about. Depending on our operation, we have to make sure that, to the best of our ability, that our operation is not impacting the larger community. And potentially harmful atmospheres is one way that we could impact the larger community. Biological agents also would be a focus more in the industrial hygiene area. Infectious organisms, COVID-19, the influenza virus, HIV, other infectious organisms, and other biological agents. In my second industrial hygiene class, I talk a lot about ticks. Ticks carry a lot of nasty diseases, and there are a lot of occupations where workers may be exposed to tick bites, where they may be bitten by ticks. So that is also a concern, and that's a concern that would fall within industrial hygiene. Okay, we talked about harmful atmospheres. These are substances that can be inhaled. There may also be substances in our workplace that we can ingest or absorb. There are 4 main routes of exposure that I'll talk about later, and through these routes of exposure, we can be exposed to a variety of harmful substances. There are some substances that may not be overall that bad for our health, but they can cause severe skin or eye irritation. Their impact is focusing on a particular organ or organ's system, organ-specific or system-specific irritants or substances. But skin and eyes, that gets a lot of attention. Because our skin, our eyes, they are in the line of fire for a lot of hazards, maybe more than other organ systems. Another type of hazard that industrial hygiene focuses on is what I call invisible energies, ionizing, non-ionizing radiation. There are some work environments where employees may be exposed to ionizing radiation. The medical industry, if you end up working as a safety manager in the healthcare industry, ionizing radiation is very likely something that would be on your list of concerns, primary concerns that you need to pay adequate attention to. Non-ionizing radiation, that's found in even more industries. It's a more common hazard than ionizing radiation. Temperatures in the work environment, too hot, too cold. That affects a lot of industries. Sound pressures, noise. Sound pressures can affect our hearing, can affect us in other ways as well. Also falls under industrial hygiene. Extreme external atmospheric pressure or pressure change. When I was working in Colorado, we had a crew that went up to Pikes Peak. We were doing asphalt paving at 13,000 feet. Before we sent that crew up there, we had a meeting to talk about the potential effects that could have on the workers. Now, we ended up not having any problems. We took some measures. We had supplemental oxygen available. We had a work rest cycle in place so workers wouldn't overdo it when they were working at 14,000 feet. We had precautions in place. We ended up not having any problems, though, I think, because most of the workers that went up on that project, they were acclimated to working at higher altitudes. They were Colorado natives, or they had been there long enough that they were acclimated to working at higher altitudes. Now, if you're coming from 700 feet elevation like we have in Tahlequah and going all the way up to 14,000 feet, that's going to be more challenging than going from 7,000 feet in Colorado Springs up to 14,000 feet. And most of the guys on this project lived in the Colorado Springs area. So it wasn't a major a shock to their system, so to speak. Of all the people on that project, I probably had more problems than anybody else because I'm a lowlander. I had been in Colorado for several months at the time, but I wasn't acclimated as well as the other workers. But that's an example where atmospheric pressure can come into play in our work activities and has to be considered. And it does, like these other conditions we're talking about, fall under industrial hygiene. Then we have the work practices again affecting musculoskeletal systems, the ergonomics, the subject of ergonomics. Again, keep in mind this is just an overview to give you a better idea of what we deal with in industrial hygiene. We're gonna greatly expand as we move through the course. These are some of just a sampling of the diseases, illnesses, disorders that may result from exposure to different substances or different workplace environments, different workplace activities. Again, we're talking about activities, environments, conditions, substances that fall under the industrial hygiene focus. Heat stroke. In Oklahoma, if we have workers outdoors in the summer, you need to have a heat-related illness prevention program in place. You have to pay attention to the effect of heat and humidity on the workers. And we'll talk more about this in greater detail later in the semester. This is one of those topics specifically that we will expand upon greatly. Silicosis. Exposure to crystalline silica in the workplace. In the construction industry, this was probably one of my bigger substances to deal with. And when I was working in construction in 2017, the new Silica standard came out. I was going to say we had to hustle around and make sure we were in compliance with the new OSHA Silica standard, but we had actually been working on it for a couple of years before the standard went into effect. We had already done our sampling. We knew what our exposure levels were for different workers, and we were ready to go when the new regulations went into effect. Renault syndrome And that's what we see here in the picture. This is a symptom of Renault's syndrome, also referred to as white finger, the loss of color in the fingers. We'll talk more about this later in the semester, but let me go ahead and mention, since I've got the picture up here, this can result from two different types of exposure. One type of exposure is exposure to vibration, vibrating tools. Vibrating tools like a jackhammer or big heavy drill, something that vibrates, can affect the blood vessels in the fingers and cause a loss of circulation in the fingers. It also affects the nerve endings in the fingers. Again, and it's a fairly serious condition. Now, it's not life-threatening. It's not irreversible. If a worker develops this from using a jackhammer or other vibrating tool, they go home at the end of the day and their fingers are all white. If they lay off of the jackhammer for a few days, they probably will, it'll probably repair itself or probably go back to normal. But if they use that jackhammer every day, day after day after day, and they never give the body a chance to recuperate from the damage that's being done, then you can get into some long-term effects from those vibrating tools. The vibration. The other thing that can result in Renault syndrome is cold temperatures. Cold temperatures affects the circulation in our extremities. But what's really a perfect storm for the development of Renault syndrome is when you have workers in cold environments using vibrating tools. Vibrating tools or vibration and cold temperatures, Renault syndrome is most likely to occur in those in that type of environment. Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I mentioned ticks previously. Every year, somewhere in the United States, there are workers who are bitten by ticks and develop Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Yeah, this is something I talk more about in the second industrial hygiene class. Tetanus gets overlooked. It's easily preventable with a tetanus shot and a tetanus booster every 4 or 5 years, or whatever your doctor prescribes. Tetanus can be avoided. If we have workers that work outdoors, they're exposed to the soil. That's where the bacteria lives, the tetanus bacteria. It lives in the soil. If we have workers exposed to soil, agriculture, construction, oil and gas, those workers, we should have something in our program that makes sure that workers have their vaccinations, that they have, that they're protected, inoculated against tetanus. Radiation illness, depending on our industry, that might be something that we need to be cognizant of, concerned about. Decompression illness. If your company uses divers, then it needs to be considered as well. In the construction industry, there are some types of construction where divers are utilized to go underwater for different reasons. In the bridge construction industry, certainly we used divers occasionally. And everywhere I've ever worked, if we needed divers, we didn't do it in-house. We brought in an outside company, a subcontractor that was a specialist, and they knew what they were doing, and they had all the safety stuff taken care of. Of course, I would review their plans, or other safety managers in that situation would review the subcontractor's plans and make sure they had a good plan, they were in compliance. Better yet, they're going above and beyond what OSHA required to help prevent different types of harm that can occur from diving operations. And decompression illness, the bends, that's just one of the possible consequences of a diving operation. Anthracosis, exposure to coal dust in the lungs, a type of pneumoconiosis, we're going to talk about several different diseases that affect the lungs, and how the lungs can be affected, and also how substances that enter the lungs can enter our bloodstream. Hypothermia, back to the issue of temperature in the workplace. Heat stroke, too hot. Hypothermia, too cold. And one thing about hypothermia that we'll talk about, it doesn't have to be really cold. It doesn't have to be freezing temperatures at all for hypothermia to take place. If you have workers exposed to 65-degree water for extended periods of time, they can go hypothermic. Or if you have workers who get wet and they're working in 55-degree air with a wind, they can go hypothermic also. But more on that later in the semester. Then we have another example of a disorder, and here we're getting over back into the world of ergonomics, lateral epicondylitis. Some of you have probably had lateral epicondylitis. I have had lateral epicondylitis. And if we were in a face-to-face class, I would ask you, what is lateral epicondylitis? And some of you know what I'm talking about. You would know the more common term for lateral epicondylitis. Lateral epicondylitis is tennis elbow. I don't know if you can see, but that's when you have an inflammation of the tendons on the outside of the elbow. The other elbow disorder that you can have, and this is associated with golfing, and it's referred to as golfer's elbow, affects the inside of the elbow. That's medial epicondylitis. And again, not life-threatening, but it can be life-changing if it's not taken care of. Lateral epicondylitis, medial epicondylitis, they will resolve over time if there is time for the conditions to heal. It can take 6 months for tennis elbow or golfer's elbow to heal up properly. And it's even longer if the affected body parts aren't allowed to rest and recuperate and heal up. And that's why we see a lot of times in the workplace, workers, they'll develop what could just be a minor disorder, but they're never given time to recuperate. They're working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, doing the same thing, and their tennis elbow never heals up, or their golfer's elbow never heals up, or a knee problem they might be having never has a chance to heal properly. And they end up, in some cases, suffering fairly severe consequences, maybe even to the point of requiring surgery at some point in their life. Anyhow, I'm going way too far with this. We're going to talk a little bit about ergonomics at the end of this semester, and again, take the ergonomics class if you have the chance, if you can fit that elective into your degree plan. I think it may be the most valuable elective you can take in our program, because so many workplace injuries, disorders are related to ergonomic risk factors. There are certain ergonomic risk factors in the workplace, and there are a lot of disorders that come out of those ergonomic risk factors. All right, hopefully you're getting a better idea of what we're dealing with in industrial hygiene. To further delineate between what is industrial hygiene and what isn't, let's think about some hazards that we might face in the workplace that would not fall under this umbrella of industrial hygiene. And here are some examples. And these would fall into the category of physical hazards. Crushing and pinch points, machine hazards. A fall hazard, the impact from the fall, the pressure that's generated from that impact that can certainly kill workers and cause severe injury. That's not really going to be of interest to an industrial hygienist. Hazards involving motor vehicles, collisions or rollovers, high energy impact types of hazards, or again what I would refer to as physical hazards, that's not within the realm of industrial hygiene. And there are going to be some industries where this type of hazard is more of a concern than the industrial hygiene types of hazards. But every industry is going to have a little bit, at least some of both types of hazards. Physical, And if you want to call the industrial hygiene hazards chemical hazards, that's okay. Sometimes you'll hear it discussed in that way. You got your physical hazards like we have here, then you have your chemical hazards, your exposure to chemical substances over here. But industrial hygiene is more than just chemical hazards, though that is a lot of it. And as we see here on this slide, you can almost define industrial hygiene in this way. Let me click on down to the bottom here. The branch of safety sciences focusing on harmful substances in the workplace, because that is the vast bulk of industrial hygiene. Harmful substances in the workplace, and there are thousands of substances. Here are just a few: carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, silica, beryllium, chlorine compounds, lead, asbestos. And these different substances can be in the form of a gas or a vapor or a fume. And yes, there is a difference between a gas, a vapor, and a fume, which we'll talk about later on in our class. I think it's Unit 3 when we talk more about the different states of matter that different substances can take. The substances can be in a particle form or the form of a fiber. Asbestos, that's a fiber. Liquids, other solids. There are thousands of substances that can take a lot of different forms and have very serious health consequences for workers. And if someone asks me to define industrial hygiene in one slide or in one definition, and I had to give them the best understanding possible and say one sentence. If you ask me, define industrial hygiene in one sentence, I want to talk about this right here. Branch of safety science focusing on harmful substances in the workplace. Of course, it is a lot more than that, but that gets a lot of our attention. You could even go further with this and hone in on the emphasis placed on harmful atmospheres, airborne hazards in the workplace, like silica, H2S, carbon monoxide, and also lead, asbestos. A lot of these harmful substances affect workers when they become airborne. They can affect workers in other ways also. And that leads me to the next thing that I want to mention: routes of exposure. This is covered in your text. The more we hear about this is something we certainly need to understand and remember at the finish of this program. If we don't remember anything else other than routes of exposure, we should remember routes of exposure. These are pathways by which workers can contact harmful substances. Ingestion, through the mouth into the digestive system. And once into the digestive system, it can then enter the bloodstream. Or a lot of substances can enter the bloodstream through the digestive system, but taking it in through the mouth. Absorption, absorbed into the bloodstream directly through the skin or through mucous membranes. Inhalation, it enters through the respiratory system into the lungs. Now, it can affect just the lungs, these substances, or it can pass through that blood-air barrier, get into our bloodstream, and have a systemic effect on our entire system. Entire bodies can be affected. Something that we breathe in can affect our liver, our kidneys, other organ systems within the body. Once it gets into the bloodstream, it can get into our lymph nodes and result in different types of reactions, including cancers and other disorders, once it gets into our bloodstream. And we will talk more about this when we talk about the respiratory system later in this class. We'll spend one unit just on the respiratory system. We can also be exposed to harmful substances through our skin, not absorbed into the bloodstream through the skin, but through a break in the skin or through injection, a subcutaneous type of exposure, break in the skin or injection. And there are a lot of operations. There are a lot of operations where injection can happen even if there aren't sharp instruments involved. When we think of injection, we might think of the sharps or the sharp instruments, the scalpels and the syringes that you have in the medical industry. But there are other ways that injection can occur also. One of our students, one of the first incidents that she had to deal with when she graduated was a high pressure liquid injection. It was hydraulic fluid that was ejected at a high pressure from the machine, and it was ejected at such high pressure that it broke the skin, and hydraulic fluid was injected into their system. High pressure air also can break through the skin, but hydraulic fluid injected into our bodies, it's far more common than it should be. High pressure fluids can break the skin and enter our bodies in that way. So, routes of exposure: ingestion, absorption, inhalation, and then through the skin. Inhalation probably gets the most attention. If a gun was held up to my head and I can only pick one of these as being the most of greatest concern, it would be inhalation, exposure to harmful substances through our respiratory system. That's going to be at the top of my list when it comes to a lot of the hazards that are out there in the workplace. Protect the worker's respiratory system. Ventilation systems can be designed to offer excellent protection to help eliminate this hazard of inhaling harmful substances. And there are other methods as well that can be used to control that particular type of exposure. All right, I'm going on and on and on here. And we will go. Let me go back to this. We're going to be talking about all these throughout the semester. This is just, like I said, dipping our toe into the industrial hygiene stream. There's going to be much more elaboration on everything that I've talked about in this unit so far. And I'm up to 43 minutes, so I need to put an end to this. Last thing I want to mention, where do we learn about specific harmful substances? What are the sources of information that can help us know more about these substances that we come into contact with in the workplace? Safety data sheets, or SDS sheets, would be a source. And I'm going to talk about all these in Unit 2, Unit 3, even a little bit more in the second part of Unit 1. I'll talk more about safety data sheets. But safety data sheets are an excellent source of information for us as safety managers to help us better understand the harmful substances our workers may be exposed to when they're using different types of different products, different chemicals. Another good resource, an industrial toxicology textbook. Everyone should have an industrial toxicology textbook in their library. If you ever get a chance to take an industrial toxicology class, I would encourage you to do that also. We are going to talk about industrial toxicology in the next unit, but if you could take an entire class, that would really be of benefit to you and your career. But if you can't take a class, textbooks can be an excellent resource for learning more about harmful substances. The Niosh Pocket Guide, or the Niosh Quick Guide. I call it the Niosh Quick Guide. But this is there's a hard copy version of it, and there's an online version of it. The online version, and I'll show you this later on. You go in, you type in your substance, click enter, and here's information about that substance. Another resource, Table Z in the OSHA regulations. Also look at this in more detail. The American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists publishes information about harmful substances as well. But usually to have access to their information, you have to have a subscription or be a part of an organization that has a subscription. It's not like a lot of government resources that are freely available. There may be a cost involved, but usually, I say there may be a cost involved. Usually, you're going to be able to, if you really search out your different options, you might be able to find these and not have to pay any fees for that information. University libraries may have publications of the ACGIH. That would be a resource you could use. Then finally, and these aren't all the resources out there. These are just the ones that I have found most useful. Actually, let me highlight the ones that I found most useful personally. And right here. But the last one that I've starred, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or the ATSDR. It is a huge database of information about harmful substances, toxic substances, and it is produced by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. Niosh is also part of the Centers for Disease Control, but this isn't really affiliated with Niosh. What I'm talking about here, this Toxic Substances Registry. I'll show you this later in the semester. But any of these resources, if we have, let's say we have a new operation, we bring in new chemicals into our workplace, and we want to learn about those new chemicals, first thing, look at the safety data sheet for that new chemical. But then if you want to go beyond that, you have these other resources you can take a look at. All right, that's all I've got for this video. In summary, industrial hygiene is focused on the work environment and conditions in that environment and practices in that environment that can cause harm to workers and or the public. Let's not forget the public that could be impacted by our operations. And the real focus is on harmful substances. The bulk of the focus, the bulk of the attention is on those harmful substances and how they can impact workers and the public. All right, in the next video, I'm going to talk more about the evaluation process, how we evaluate a workplace and identify industrial hygiene types of hazards in our workplace. All right, see you in that video.